What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and as I am trying not to bake like a lizard in this really unprecedented New Orleans heat this August, I am going to try my best to bring you some updates from Tulane training camp now that I've been able to attend for the last week and a half or so. I'm going to get a little into what changes I see on the field, changes in the coaching staff, what kind of remains the same, and things like different playing conditions and the like. But I just wanted to take a minute to talk about really how hot it is in New Orleans right now and how hard it almost is to think in this weather. I think a lot of people can agree that this is one of the hotter summers that they can remember in a long time. This excessive heat warning that is quite literally popping up on my phone every single day. I think we should probably be paying a little more attention to it. And I'm usually used to starting at Tulane in the mornings at 7:30 and then heading over on to Saints practice, which starts around 9:30 or so, and catching that. But I'll be honest, logistics have not allowed me to go to some of those practices, but the ones that I've been free for, I've been too burnt out from just the week and those few hours in the sun. So just talking about that potential effect on the players and why it matters that they're actually getting conditioning work done in this weather. It's not like the Saints where there's been a couple of days where we spent quite a few hours outside. And I know that a lot of practices have had, fans in attendance. So that kind of makes us stay outside for longer. But the whole time I'm just kind of thinking, why are we all being tortured when the Saints ultimately play inside a dome? And I don't think there's any stadiums hotter than what we would see here. Whereas Yeoman's a fully outside stadium. And as much as that is an issue to kind of train and prepare for, I think it honestly turns into, quite frankly, a competitive advantage for Tulane, at least in the months of September, as do a few other things that I'm going to break down on the show. And I think I am the only local media member that is at least attempting to attend two training camps back to back. It's something I've been trying to do for the last 3 seasons. It was a little easier last year. My first season at Tulane, their practice started at 8:30, so I kind of had to pick and choose which day I was going to. Much to our relief, they then moved the practice up an hour early. Not the best for my insomnia, but once you get into the training camp schedule, I've surprised myself and how many times I've been asleep by 10 this month. But having that extra hour just before it gets, at this point, overwhelmingly hot, and so I was able to make that work a little bit more last year. All this rant to say, I have been attending Saints camp, and I'm probably going to do something after the first preseason game once I'm really able to kind of see things that I've been looking at Saints training camp. I have been giving when I go daily training camp updates on After Further Review with Matt Moscona on ESPN Baton Rouge from 3 to 6, and I post that all on Twitter. All that to say, we'll get there. But I mean, Tulane is just kind of my bread and butter right now. It's a really fun feeling around the university, and it's one I'm not really used to feeling, to be entirely honest with you. Just kind of talking with past alumni, people that have worked in the broadcast booth, like Todd Graffinini, who is the voice of the Pelicans and was the voice of the Green Wave for 27 years, football and basketball for 12, I believe, if I'm getting that correct. We just kind of are trying not to laugh talking about Tulane being at the top of the food chain, because just being a student there, the years that have kind of been the 21st century of Tulane football, this is definitely an opportunity for the football team. And I know that there's all of this stuff going around with conference realignments, if you could call it that at this point. If you'd asked me, just to kind of go on this small tangent, if you'd asked me earlier this offseason if going to the Pac-12 was a plus move for Tulane, I really wouldn't have thought twice about it. But now that we're looking at the Pac-4 that is potentially joining the ACC or fragments of it, or maybe the Big Ten is now contacting, I believe, Cal and Stanford. There was talks that the ACC is looking to add all 4 of them, which they have the ESPN deal going for them. It's definitely not something to sniff at, especially when you consider the fact that they were looking to poach several more of our conference members. All of that to say, it's a giant mess right now. And it's one that I think everyone saw coming, but not necessarily in the way that it unfolded. And it's probably going to be a cautionary tale of, we all saw this coming, and it was kind of foolish to think that it would have happened in any way other than this, just to be honest. Maybe the timing of it is just really suboptimal, and it is. But to think that this wasn't all going to just kind of blow open one day, I think was just a little short-sighted. And now, unfortunately, everyone's going to kind of have to deal with the repercussions of that and just all of the things that have been done to college athletics since I've started working around them. For not knowing that much about college football, the NCAA, just again, growing up, not having a college football team to follow along with my dad going to Denison, my mom, became a paralegal, and then Tulane didn't really inspire much fandom in me when I went there, but really getting kind of engrossed in it these last couple of seasons, it's just been wild to me how every single year I've had to go read the bylaws, I've had to go read all of these different things. And even still, I feel like every day I'm playing a degree of catch up. All of that to say, that's kind of the feeling that I think everyone is going to feel right now. And to be honest with you, it's probably nothing but a giant distraction for a football program right now. So, with all of this talk of conference realignment, I just don't see how you have any real conversations in August, I guess was something you could have said a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, it's really just the definition of outside noise. And it's something I just don't think Tulane, at least as a program, is really interested in talking about right now. Something they might be a little more open to this year. I know the 1-0 mentality really carried them through last year. And I think that there was definitely a challenge in having to balance the idea of all this success all of a sudden being ranked, all of these new milestones last year, the first time in like 80 years that they had hosted a ranked team. It was just week after week seemed to be all of these historic new things. And here we are. I don't believe Tulane has ever been picked to win the conference. I could be incorrect, at least in the American Athletic Conference. And they have not been picked or ranked in a preseason poll, I believe, since its inception in 1978. And it's worth noting that they were the only G5 program to be ranked this year, because there was quite a few really strong G5 programs at the end of last year. I know, because we were all kind of following along on pins and needles with the rankings at the end of the season, and with the regular season UCF loss for Tulane, what that kind of turned into in terms of a washing machine of possibilities for hosting that conference championship game. That's kind of where we're at right now again. But the difference is, I think the players know how to handle it. If that wasn't clear through the final stretch of last season. So now they come in, I believe, correctly ranked in this preseason poll, and it feels about right, especially considering that they were the one lone G5 team that made it into the New Year's Six and accomplished what they did in that New Year's Six game. So it would feel honestly like a snub for Tulane not to be included. Now, that being said, I'm sure you could have said that a million times in the past about decent seasons that Tulane has had, but it really didn't kind of catch on until the end of last season, despite the early season wins they had against Kansas State, Houston, and the like. It really didn't all kind of come together until the end of the season. All that being said, I think that's absolutely fine. And the Cotton Bowl, I think, just really has reinvigorated years long alumni base too. Just looking at the fact that the homecoming game, which I believe is October 21st, against Rice, who's a new conference member, or North Texas. I'm really screwing this up right now. That's sold out already. You have to have season tickets in order to purchase a ticket to that game. The single season tickets are all sold out. To me, that really spells a bunch of alumni that probably never bothered flying in for a lot of homecoming games in the past. I just think about the Tulsa homecoming game. That was my first season as a sideline reporter. It was pretty cold that night. I remember being in a sweatshirt and leggings, which is honestly oftentimes rare, even in November in New Orleans. I believe that's when that game was. It was, lost in overtime. It was a bad loss. And it was one of those games that's just kind of a canon memory from that first season. Because as I've said, it was my my whatever you call it, 5th year anniversary as an alumni, and my first as a sideline reporter. And I hadn't gone to, and I still haven't really, I don't know what year I'm on at this point, but I hadn't gone to a reunion or anything. And so that was kind of my getting back into my school spirit, and then just kind of my spirit balloon getting popped. And then I remember the turnout at homecoming last year against Memphis. I think that's where I was getting in my head before. Granted, that game started really strong. Everyone kind of left at halftime. Let's not do that this year. Although I think that we've learned better, and that our fans rock after that championship game. I don't really have anything else to say, but it's just wild that all of these things are happening for Tulane. But again, I think if you ask the players, they really could care less about this outside noise, and they're really focusing on, I've seen the words just kind of maintaining, which I find interesting, because a lot of teams would say, we're shooting for the stars, we're going up to that next goal. But for Tulane as a program, maintaining is not a bad thing. Again, when you look at the fact that they got that one New Year's Six berth as a G5 program, I don't really know how they necessarily top that this year. College football playoffs aside, which, Cincinnati had that run. I'm not going to get on a rant here. All that to say, I'm just really looking forward to the buzz that has really entered this year of training camp. And it's just been crazy how miles different every single training camp has felt like for me this year, so far. I missed spring camp in my first season because I was hired in mid to late July. And so I didn't really know anyone walking into training camp. And there were things that I thought were promising, and there were things that kind of concerned me that ended up kind of carrying throughout the year. All of that really got wiped clean in last year's offseason. But as I've said, there was just this air of anxiety, and it was hard to ignore and hard to blame. Because again, I think these guys really showed that you can manifest anything. And I'm still kind of grappling with the fact that they really just, spoke their dreams into existence last year. But at this time last year, that's all it was. It was just dreams. And I remember going on TV on WDSU and talking about how, a lot of the players are talking about the conference championship, but I think that a bowl game is probably a good goal to shoot for. Even I was kind of underselling it at this point because we just really had no idea. And as confident as I was in the fact that they would be able to turn around last year's team, I'm just so unfamiliar with, again, college football at that point. And knowing that Tulane hadn't gone to that game yet, at least in the American Athletic Conference, it was a little wild of a thing to say, but I think you saw just a little bit of the jitters. And I wrote an article on Nick Anderson. I talked with him a little about this. Of course, there were some people that weren't necessarily buying it at first. And again, that's really a testament to the leadership of those guys in that locker room that really got everyone to believe in that. But, I really didn't know how to report on training camp last year because I felt like I just sounded delusional half the time, saying that everything was looking so promising and things were looking like I thought they should. And I don't really know what that necessarily means. I don't really know how to explain it. And I don't have much to go off of other than my instincts. But my instincts just felt a little better about last year's team than they did the year before that. And that was, again, even before the hurricane and everything like that, it just felt like the right pieces were all in place. And it was validating to see that at least was correct on my end. Being that, I was trying to promote them as best as I could without kind of sounding like a homer in a way, which is a little difficult for me. Again, just, being a part of the broadcast group that has such a good relationship with the team. And again, being the fact that I went there for my undergrad, it's a little bit difficult, but sorry, I just had a complete heat blank there, but we are back on track. All that to say, I don't pretend that I'm necessarily impartial, but I didn't want to sound ridiculous to an extent last year. But this year, there's just like an air of swag to the entire team. And it shows in things like the attention that they've done to the locker room and to the facilities and the turf. The turf has made a massive difference, both just in climate and the way that it just feels so different than turf, for lack of a better term. I know that it is turf, but it doesn't feel like it. And I've always been conducting any of these like quasi experiments every single day where I've, been sitting down on the turf, which I don't think I've ever sat on the turf in August at Yeoman Stadium ever, because you can usually see those kind of heat mirage things going across the center of the field over the now blue hair angry wave, which I'm really excited about this new era. But it's interesting because it's almost too hard to kneel on, whereas turf is usually pretty soft. This turf, they're all in the shape of a curlicue. I've noticed that they're a lot more dispersed, and talking to Corey Glory said a lot of that is the fact that it hasn't been played on yet. And that kind of pushes it together. But all of the pieces of turf, grass, whatever you call these things, it just seem to have more integrity and again, a complete different independent shape. And I feel like there's probably something in the curlicue design that, it either has to do with not catching cleats or twisting with other pieces of turf. Again, I don't actually know what to call those things, but you can tell that it just feels different. And that makes a massive difference when your playing surface is one of the top-notch playing surfaces. It's the same turf that was in AT&T Stadium. And I've talked about this in some of my articles, but just the idea and psychology of, and that same idea of if you're taking the SAT, going to that building, taking it at the same time of day kind of thing. I think having the same turf, even though it's not obviously that from that huge euphoric win in Arlington, there's definitely a little bit of a mental key there for me. But it also just shows, I think, a commitment to athletics and this huge emphasis on it that, again, I think is very unprecedented in the 21st century, at least. I'm not going to pretend that I am the ultimate Tulane historian here. Would recommend you to several people, including Todd and Steve Barrios, before I ever try to opine on the days that I simply wasn't alive for. But all I know is in this century, just there's not been this level of attention paid to academics across the board. And it really helps that a lot of teams are doing well, including the basketball team who represented the USA in the World University Games. You know, they ended up with the bronze medal. The baseball team pulled out kind of this Cinderella story of a conference championship to match the football teams. And it's a good idea to kind of ride that momentum when you can. But the important thing is directing that momentum in the correct way. So all that stuff I was saying about conference realignment and all of that, that's a problem that doesn't involve the football team. I know that sounds bizarre, but that's not really on their plates right now. It's, going 1-0 and really, I think, making a statement this season. And getting things like new turf really helps make that statement, especially when you look at the fact that it has been, I believe, like the hottest summer in New Orleans ever. I think that might actually be correct, as hyperbolic as it seems. Just this heat wave has been literally unbearable. And you can tell that this coconut turf, it's made out of coconut and some other type of pellet. It's not the same as that black rubber that just melts into what feels like tar. And I was genuinely worried about my shoes fusing to it during the Ole Miss game, but this turf is significantly cooler. I know Coach Fritz has said it's supposedly 10 degrees cooler than the outside temperature. I can't necessarily say I've checked that, but if I'm thinking about it right now, it's cool to the touch, and I can't say that about previous turf. And there's, again, the fact that I could sit at it at all, and it's not just generating this massive heat coming up from it. And I played soccer on a lot of turf growing up. My high school had real grass, but most of the places I played were turf. And you could tell when you were on bad turf. You could tell when it was a really hot day and the turf was just becoming unbearable, and you could barely, again, hear yourself think, see straight for that matter. And just to think about adding on pads and a helmet and being that much more condensed in space than I was playing soccer, it genuinely alarms me to think about. So all that to say, I, as a observer that has not actually put cleats into this turf, give it an A++. But Corey and I also had the joy, I think we briefly talked about this when I had him on as a guest last week, of walking through the new locker room. And it's cool. And that was without kind of all the lights and the video board all lit up like you guys saw in a lot of those reveal videos that Tulane posted. It still looks cool with just regular lights going on in there. And I think I kind of hobbled through the locker room once or twice back then, but this is one that you literally want to hang out in. And again, these kind of things are what matters right now, is investing in things that these athletes are going to be dealing with on a day-to-day basis in one of the most unforgiving climates in the country at this time of year, probably the top one. Other cases can be made in the winter for sure, but I have yet to feel something hotter than a summer in New Orleans like this one, to be honest with you. So that turf, the fact that so many of the players have talked about it. I remember I saw Jaquan Jackson at Saints camp the week before everything started, and he was just talking up the turf like crazy. Everyone I talked to, and now that I felt it for myself. But when you talk about recruiting and being able to sustain things like donations and the like, it also matters that these are kind of put into things that have a really fast turnaround, that people can see kind of the immediate payoff of success and donations. And that entices people, hopefully, to give more. And so that, to me, is really the most important thing that Tulane could have done this offseason, was really shore up their facilities, especially when you look at the beginning of the season and the fact that they open with 3 games, or it's not 3 home games, but Southern Miss is so close to here that at 3 p.m. kickoff is just as testy. But man, that Ole Miss 2:30 kickoff, the turf is going to make a huge difference. To me, it offers Tulane a competitive advantage at this point, given that they will have spent a month playing on that field. And we're going to have our first scrimmage on Saturday, which will, I think, illuminate a lot. But, they are actually going to get a lot out of just getting used to this turf, getting used to how it feels, but getting used to this weather and what it's like to play outdoors here in September in the middle of the afternoon. I remember before the Oklahoma game, that never was here. That was supposed to be a noon kickoff time. That was going to be my first game as a sideline reporter. And as we know, everything went haywire. And I remember that we did, I think, 3 scrimmages at Yeoman at noon in that same way of simulating the same start time. And it was brutal. It was really brutal. And I'm frankly a little scared for this scrimmage on Saturday. But I have to get used to it because I know that we do not have the sunlight advantage on our sideline in that afternoon. Again, worth noting that I did see them set up tents actually over the benches on the defensive side of the field for the first time ever, really, which really stuck out to quite a few of us because it just, again, goes to show how hot it is here. But, as much as Ole Miss had a lot of advantages, including being able to go inside their indoor practice facility when it was pouring down rain and that multi-hour rain delay, I think the rain could actually be a welcome sight, although sometimes it gets hotter when it rains in the summer. But Tulane's definitely going to have the home field advantage this time. So again, just all the preparation that can be put into that. But that's, why you start having these scrimmages on Saturdays. But that, I think, will really start to illuminate so many of these roster questions that, again, I think I can answer as best to my ability with what I've seen be trotted out in first teams and what you can kind of prognosticate based on last year's lineups and just based on the comments and what we've seen. But that's really, I think, where you're going to see people start to separate a little more, especially to me at 2 of the biggest question marks on the roster and ones that I just don't think you can see that much of out of practice necessarily. And to me, that's safety and running back. Like, listen, I know that probably the biggest emotional void on this team is Nick Anderson, Dorian Williams, easy, not to mention that they were either the leading, co-leading, or second leading tacklers probably almost every week of last season, including quite a bit of the season before. But I feel really strongly confident in what they've been able to do with the players that they have there now. We've seen Corey Platt and Jesus Machado play massive roles on this team, including last year. They won that game in Kansas State a lot of the time running out 3 linebacker sets. And that was kind of the rotation there. Again, there was an entire defensive series in that Kansas State game. And I actually want to go back and rewatch who was in that, where all of the starters on that defense were not in the game. And that, Lummy Young, I believe Larry Brooks, Macon Clark, I know Nick Anderson and Dorian Williams were missing, but it was to the magnitude of the entire middle of the field, defensively speaking, which is quite interesting when you think about the fact that that's what they have to replace this year. But safety to me, they have kind of completely new guys coming in, and there are 3 roles at safety that they have to fill. You can get creative with your linebacker sets. You can, and again, they have guys that have spent time there, and they have guys that played there at safety as well. But the nickel role, I think, is just going to become so important. And that's something that I think Macon Clark really helped me almost learn in real time last year. The scouting academy that I've done, defensive back was the first position group that I've completed. I'm trying to get through defensive line now with everything that's happening in my life. But it really stuck out to me how intricate every single position is. And that includes box and free safety. Those are completely different nuanced roles. And then you get the nickel back, which is its own completely different set of rules. And watching Macon Clark really grow into his own and the traits that I could kind of tie back to what I had kind of seen out of CJ Gardner-Johnson, where, it was just kind of his disruption and that short area quickness off the line of scrimmage and the ability to blitz, having the functional strength like Macon Clark did in the Houston game to knock his blocker into, I believe it was either a running back that got pitched the ball or it was a receiver that just caught it and stopped them both dead in their tracks. And he was not that kind of big of a player. But again, that functional strength, which goes back to Kurt Hester, who is also worth noting that there are not been that many cramps, and that's really impressive. I don't care what kind of conditioning you do. That's just really a testament to, I think, how strong this program is. But it is one of those days, y'all, where I apparently hit the pause button. I continued my train of thought, and here we are getting back to my idea that I was originally getting at. But safety. Again, getting back to that, that affects how you cover, how you bring guys into the box to stop the run game. And the fact that you're kind of working from square one with a lot of these guys, because I think a lot of the idea was to have Andre Sam, who had transferred in with Lance Guidry at the time, and then stayed and ended up going to LSU after spring camp was over. He had really stuck out as someone that could easily have played that role. And I think what we're going to see, at least to start, is I'm going to try to say his name correctly, Cam Pettislow. And that's how he said it on Jimmy O's podcast. So I am simply going off of how he said his own name. He immediately stuck out to me. The first thing that stuck out to me the first day of training camp was that several number changes had happened. And I'm in like, who are 8, 9, and 99 right now, kind of making up the second level of the defense. Well, 9 is Corey Platt, 99 is Jesus Machado. I believe they might be switched around because they made that perfectly confusing. And then Pettislow is 8. And it stuck out because his build really stood out to me. He's on the shorter side, but he is built. And you don't need someone at the slot role that can see over the line of scrimmage the way that you do at linebacker. All that to be said, Nick Anderson was also 5'9", and I don't think Tulane people complain much about that. But I really want to see someone like him in a scrimmage setting just to see his functional strength, his tackling ability, whether or not he has, strong technique, which I'm inclined to think he does, especially if he's come in. And this is really, and it sticks out too that he is running with the first team, and he wasn't here at all for spring camp. And he was pretty late transfer towards the end, but Willie Fritz has talked about his intelligence. I'm really looking forward again to kind of seeing that in practice, but size also is just a big thing that matters. And that's something that stuck out to me about Darius Swanson, who was another transfer, I believe, from Nebraska. He's been running with the ones as well. And I think that probably makes sense. I believe it's been him and Bailey Despaney at those 2 safety roles. And then we've seen Pettislow at the slot role, Lance Robinson, Jarius Monroe at cornerback. Then they've kind of been rotating, it's Tyler Grubbs, Corey Platt, and Jesus Machado. And I'm honestly pretty comfortable with a lot of those names, as unfamiliar as I am with them. Just the coaching this year has just seemed extremely sharp all around the board. And that's not to say that it wasn't last year, but I think last year there was a very important emotional component that just doesn't exist this year. And it's something that I think the coaching staff handled very well last year, because it was this idea of kind of battling themselves to a degree as well. This year, they have gone to the top of the mountaintop, and they can see it now. So to me, it's training wheels off, and it's full pedal to the metal. And it's been really good to see that kind of continue, even though it's been so hot out. Something that stuck out to us today, and I've been really enjoying seeing, again, just these coaches that I feel like I have no business just watching this closely. Greg McMahon with the special teams. He has just come on strong immediately. And, we all kind of commented on the fact that I don't really think we've seen a special teams drill like the one that we saw today, where, they had someone running downfield, and then someone would kind of meet them about 15 yards down and try to push them away from these 2 cones that obviously the player is trying to go through. So the idea of pushing them off their blocks in when you're blocking in special teams. But for the most part, we just kind of saw them kick and not really apply that much in terms of individual and contact drills at that. But as someone that loves contact drills, I was really enjoying it from the sideline. It also just kind of, I think, ups the competition around the board. But just again, to see all of the attention to detail that's been paid to all of these rooms, I personally am really confident. And I said that last season. And last year, I was kind of going off of this strong belief of guys like Nick Anderson and all of these strong leaders who, again, made me want to believe them. And I did believe them eventually. Again, I thought that they were going to be good last year, but I think we can all agree that they definitely saw that for themselves and really saw it through. This year, I'm just going off of football. I don't really care about the last season and, what this kind of 3-season arc has been in terms of assessing what I'm seeing on the football field now. And as much as the context of the last 2 seasons is important, I think the 2021 season had a lot to do more with the 2022 offseason than that one does with this offseason. I hope that made a modicum of sense. All that to say, as much as you would think that this success might be affecting this team, they're just so focused to me. And the guys that stepped up in the Cotton Bowl are seeing, I think, greater roles. But I also think it's worth stating that they're letting a lot of these competitions play out. And it's not just, okay, seniority, next man up thing. that just doesn't really win you any football games. The other position, running back, that's something I'm really curious about when you're actually seeing these guys try to work through what I think is a really strong defensive line and a sneaky one at that now, with the amount of time that all of these guys in that room have really spent playing at this point. To me, they have an advantage of depth there. And that's crazy to say when, Adonis Freelu tore his ACL last season and, he was 30 pounds on his nearest backup. So they kind of had to retool, I think, a lot of that. And that's not to say that one player changes your entire scheme, but it does kind of limit what you can do when, again, there's that difference in size. But just the pass rush skills that these guys are, going to be picking up through the last 3 seasons, being able to say that they had a safety like they did last year. That's something, again, situational football I brought up a lot in this podcast. The fact that they've been running a lot of their drills out of the end zone from the 1-yard line is not lost on me. And I will again point to the fact that USC has still not hired a special teams coordinator. Maybe they have in the last couple of weeks, but to my knowledge, that's not been a change. All of that to say, the attention to detail is just so there. And running back to me is something that you're not going to replace Tajay Spears probably ever, but at least not in one off season. And that might not necessarily be the answer either. There is something to be said about a committee of running backs. Now, that being said, who kind of headlines that kind of remains to be seen. And that's something I'm really hoping we'll get to see out of this scrimmage because, they have, I'm going to butcher his name. Is it Shedro? He had a running back transfer in. My roster is downstairs. I believe it's Shedro Lewis. I'm sorry if that's incorrect. He has a lot of, kickoff returns for touchdowns, I believe, and he's really quick. He just blew by me on a run today, and his acceleration downfield really stuck out to me. And that's, again, something when you're looking at returns for touchdowns on special teams, you have to have that entire speed. And to be honest with you, I think Tajay had a lot of burst and explosiveness and elusiveness, but having the quickness downfield the way that I kind of just saw this guy shoot down there, it's not something that I've really seen out of a running back in a while. Again, I'm not basing that all off of one run. It just, again, it's enough piquing my curiosity. And then again, this kid, Arnold Barnes, who to me looks and runs like Michael Turner in terms of stature and just being sneakily quick. And the fact that they're working a lot of these receivers into the running game, the receiving game as well, which was kind of a cornerstone of Tajay's game, especially the second half of last year and looking at that Houston win. But again, the fact that he was the leading rusher and receiver in the Southern Miss loss that week prior as well. So if they can kind of continue that on, to me, the biggest competitive advantage of all of that is teams. I don't know how you prepared for Tajay, but at least they kind of knew what they were looking at this year, especially if you're one of those first couple of teams on the roster. I think it's really smart, even if they kind of have decided on a committee of 2 or 3, not to really play their cards that early, because it's a lot different preparing for 5 different running back styles than it is for 1 or 2. And to me, that's really an advantage that Tulane can hang on to. And in the meantime, kind of figure out that room. But there's really no sense in just kind of, getting to that answer prematurely, especially when you look at the mileage on running backs and the fact that, if you can kind of hold that decision off and keep them a little more fresh-legged until the season really gets going. But also, again, when you look at those kind of important early season games and the fact that they're going to be lacking a lot of tape on Tulane, because Tulane's also lacking a lot of tape on their opponents this year as well. So I think as many cards you can hold close to your chest when you have the same quarterback coming back, a lot of the same receivers, the running game to me is definitely something that I think Tulane would be smart to hold to their chest. All that to be said, I think we're going to really see more of a story in these scrimmages and just seeing how these guys react to different blocking schemes, how they react to, I think we're going to see a little difference in coverage this year from the defense. Perhaps a little different fronts and coverage schemes. Just what I've heard them calling out. A lot of their coverage is really tight this year. It implies kind of that man heavy scheme. And I'm just really looking forward to seeing some good football play out. And that's something, again, I can confidently say about Tulane. So I will be back on Friday with my guests as usual, trying to kind of figure out this schedule for training camp. I might kind of get more of the players on during the season because it is just really hard for everyone right now on this schedule. But I am going to kind of also try to bring in, I think, some guests from these new schools and the ones that are kind of early up on Tulane's schedule and get somewhat of a preview for these schools that I'm pretty unfamiliar with, including South Alabama. I know a little bit about Ole Miss and doing a little catch up again on Southern Miss and then all of these new teams into the conference. So if I can get phone a friend and help on that, I certainly will do so and hopefully bring you guys some insight on that. All of that to say, there's really no format to how I think my training camp coverage is going to go throughout this month. I've learned in my life and the chaos that runs in my brain. Creating a schedule is very much just a suggestion of guidelines for me. But I've also learned that life comes at you more often than not in very unexpected ways, and you have to be flexible. And that includes things like the sun literally melting my brain off. So I've just kind of been going off of what stuck out to me on a week by week basis and going off the fly. Like I said, I'll try to bring in some Saints coverage as well. I might kind of focus in a little more on that nickelback role and bringing some of my scouting stuff as well. But I hope you guys are enjoying the seat by the pants coverage, where at least we're kind of on the theme now of Tulane and Saints to a degree, but I am enjoying getting back into the swing of this stuff, and I will see you guys on Friday on Before the Whistle.